Welcome to the first installment of a pioneering new voice at the intersection of higher education, health sciences and innovation, and psychedelic assisted therapy. This is episode 1 in the story of U-PEP, the University's Psychedelic Education Program. I'm your host, David Drapkin, a social worker, clinical psychotherapist, psychedelic educator, and I'm a massive fan of U-PEP. The University Psychedelic Education Program is philanthropically funded to support university faculty in America integrating evidence-based, culturally responsive psychedelic education into their higher education programs. And right now, in the current U-PEP cohort, there are 63 faculty members representing 30 universities from 22 different states. And some of these partner universities include Columbia, UPenn, UC Davis, University of Colorado, University of Georgia, Johns Hopkins, University of Michigan, NYU, and Yale. It's amazing that so many prestigious universities are now working with U-PEP to build their own psychedelic programs. And U-PEP initially started with social work and nursing programs, but it's now expanding to more and more disciplines, with psychology, public health, and medicine programs being eligible for the 2026 cohort. Applications to join the cohort are live now, by the way, until December the 5th, and they're open to all US-based accredited faculty. So if you want to find out more information, go to upep.org. Back to today's groundbreaking first episode, it's fitting that we invite Dr. Heidi Allen because she actually created Columbia University's psychedelic therapy training program for MSW, Master Social Work students, back in 2024. And her program was literally the first comprehensive within degree psychedelic therapy training program in any academic professional school. So it's amazing to hear how she pioneered this program before U-PEP was formally launched, how she overcame the challenges, but also why she believes that U-PEP is so essential to ensure our health workforce is able and ready to provide psychedelic expertise to the public and to healthcare institutions, regulatory bodies, and policymakers right now. Before we jump into our conversation, I want to share a wee bit more about Heidi's background. So, Heidi Allen, MSW, PhD. She's an associate professor at Columbia University in the School of Social Work and Mailman School of Public Health and Department of Health Policy and Management. Dr. Allen studies the impact of social policies, such as approval of therapeutic psychedelics and Medicaid, on access to healthcare, health and mental health outcomes, and financial well-being. Dr. Allen has a certificate in psychedelic-assisted therapies and research from CIIS, and she's completed their MAPS MDMA therapy training program in 2022. Dr. Allen is also a commissioner on the Medicaid and CHIP Payment and Access Commission, and is also the recipient of the 2019 Social Policy Researcher Award from the Society for Social Work and Research. Welcome to the first chapter of U-PEP's story. Let's dive in. It's me, David Drapkin, with Dr. Heidi Allen, and I am, overjoyed, really honored and grateful to be here, Heidi. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Great. I'm really excited to be the first guest. So thank you.
Yeah, I just want to start by saying thank you because when I was living in New Jersey, I used to live in New York as well, and I saw a news article somewhere about Columbia School of Social Work starting this psychedelic education training program for MSWs, and I'm a social worker too. And I think I literally squealed and couldn't believe what I was reading because it was just so amazing and so desperately needed and so aligned with, I think, the vision that I'd hoped one day would come true. And you were doing it. I wasn't ready for that. So first of all, thank you.
It's been a joy. Yeah. Thank
Yeah,
you for saying that.
yeah. Thank you so much. And we're going to hear about your story as a social worker, as an educator, being a pioneer around psychedelic education for social work. And then we're going to hear about the U-PEP program. And I think the best place to start is you as a social worker. So you don't have to say how far back it was, but In the beginning, when
In the beginning,
in the beginning,
in the very, yeah, yeah.
why did you become a social worker? What were your hopes for it, and what was really the kind of the mission that you thought that would help you to accomplish?
Um, I mean, that's a big question, and one that I think at the time that I didn't give too much thought to. I wanted to help people. I wanted to do good with my life, and like many people, I started out with a degree in psychology, and from there, I started working in psychiatric residential treatment for adolescents,
Mm,
and I really enjoyed that. The person who was doing the most substantive work in that place was a social worker. He suggested that I go and get an MSW, and so I went down that path. And interestingly enough, early on, I took a policy class, and I was so blown away about the potential for macro level change, when you apply social work
yeah.
values to what the world could look like. And so I, did go into clinical practice. I did work in acute mental health settings with adolescents. And from there, I went into practice as an emergency department social worker at a level one trauma center, which was really, when we talk about altered states of consciousness or non-ordinary states of consciousness, I think that oftentimes in the emergency department, I was working with people who were experiencing non-ordinary states of consciousness
Oh wow.
when, like somebody they love suddenly died. You just enter into this space that really does resemble a non-ordinary state. Uh, but I worked in the emergency department. I loved the job until the state had a bunch of cuts to their Medicaid program. And my job went from one where I felt like I was helping people to one where I was, basically saying like, well, I don't really know where you can go to get this help. Like the safety net was really struggling. And that's when I decided to start studying the Medicaid program and access to care. And so, I pivoted out of clinical practice about 5 years into my career and started studying access to care. I, got my PhD studying the Medicaid program, and then I worked on a study called the Oregon Health Insurance Experiment, which was, kind of a natural experiment when Oregon allocated Medicaid slots via lottery, which sounds is like very weird public policy, but it also was the first time, that you could look at the impact of giving uninsured adults Medicaid coverage and apply like a causal framework to that analysis. And so that study was, it's a really well-known study. And after I finished up doing that, I, you know, came to Columbia to start an academic path where I studied health insurance and access to care
Mm,
and quality of care and how that relates to health and behavioral health outcomes for the last, like 12 years.
yeah. And one of the things around our conversation today is accessibility and kind of equity around healthcare, particularly innovative treatments like psychedelics, but other breakthrough treatments. So, in a nutshell, can you tell us, Heidi, how well are we doing in the American healthcare system over, say, the last 10, 15 years around accessibility? I know it's a big question. Is healthcare more accessible, mental health care in particular? Looking at Medicaid, you were just saying, and
Yeah.
to what extent are you concerned potentially around what could happen in the future around accessibility to care?
Yeah, so this is kind of the origin of my journey into psychedelic therapy is that in 2019, I was asked to give a talk at the International Forum on Consciousness about what happens when innovation enters the US healthcare system. In the context, they were thinking specifically of psychedelics. And it's like you don't have to study this to know the answer. When innovation comes into the US healthcare system, it often starts by widening disparities because the innovation makes its way to people that have money, and then it makes its way to people that have good insurance, and then
Mm,
slowly it trickles down to people who have Medicaid or people who are using the safety net. But there's that period of time where the people who benefit from it are probably the people who need it the least. I mean, it depends on the condition, but especially when you're thinking of things that have a high burden a disproportionate burden among low income people, which includes things like behavioral health conditions. I would expect that, as psychedelics are introduced, that that the people who need it the most might be the least and the last likely to get it. And so I gave that talk at USONA Institute, and they asked me, one of the points I really thought was important to make while I was there was that you can't think about access at FDA approval. Like if you wait until FDA approval to think about access, it's years too late. You have to think about access all along the decision, pathway. And they heard me and they asked me if I would serve on their clinical advisory board. And that is like kind of where I entered the psychedelic space, was through the lens of access. Like how do we make sure to make the right decisions so that when psychedelics are approved by the FDA, that people who need them can get them. And that also led to, my decision to start this program at Columbia.
Yeah, let's continue with that. So, this decision, what was the beginning of it forming in your mind, and then starting to take the steps around? I think I can do something here. Like, take us back. Like, what was the process you were going through? You went to Oregon, yeah, and you were involved with USONA as well. So, what was part of that process and how it actually started to become real?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's kind of funny, people who work in psychedelic space, often joke about how like, you know, you get guided rather than, choosing your pathway. But I was attending this meeting at USONA to talk about access, and this is probably in like 2021. It was early reentry after the pandemic. And, we were having a conversation about insurance and access, and I made this comment, which something I say a lot, which is that I think insurance will pay for psychedelics. If it gets FDA approval, I have no reason to believe that insurance won't cover psychedelic care. I think it will, come with things like medical necessity and pre-authorization. Like it's not going to be easy necessarily to get it approved, but I think it will be within the benefit package that people have access to for most insurance plans. But what I really worry about, what, keeps me up at night, is that I don't know that there will be a pool of providers that actually accept insurance. So, particularly in mental health, and even more so in specialty mental health, having insurance doesn't mean that you have access. The demand is so high for such a limited pool of providers that a lot of therapists simply say, I'm not going to work with insurance. If you have an employer plan that has out of network benefits, I'll give you a bill and you can see what you can get from your insurance company, but I'm not going to engage with insurance. And this is like a really dominant model. And it's so unfortunate because, decades of advocates have fought for mental health parity, have fought to have regulations in place that say that insurance companies uh, cannot say that behavioral health benefits are going to be less than physical health benefits. Like this parity is something that is just so incredibly important that was built into the law. But what it doesn't require insurance companies to do is pay enough that providers want to participate. Like there's no rule saying, and you have to pay enough for providers to participate. There's, this thing called network adequacy where you have to demonstrate that you have enough providers in a geographic region, but it's a really kind of weak construct. And, there's a lot of research that suggests that networks actually are not very adequate, especially as it relates to, specialty mental health. So my worry was, okay, people are going to have coverage, but they aren't going to have care. When they try to find somebody that offers psychedelic therapy, there just simply won't be anybody in their insurance panel that they can go to. And so I was noting that my profession, which is social work, that I didn't see anything happening in other schools of social work. There, is one amazing researcher, Alan Davis at Ohio State, who was at the time doing research in psychedelics, but hadn't yet, brought any curriculum to the school. And I just simply didn't know of a single other program that was doing anything. And I was going to, the social work conferences, and I wasn't hearing presentations or panels. So I said this at this meeting at the Usona Institute, and somebody looked at me and they were like, "Well, you're at a school of social work. What are you doing?" And they didn't say it it wasn't an accusatory
Mm-hmm.
tone. It was totally just a straight up like curiosity. And I had this moment where I was like, yeah, well, I'm not doing anything. I'm a policy researcher. I teach in the policy program at Columbia. Like it just simply hadn't occurred to me that I could be the person to bring that forward. And then I started to think about it, and I was like, well, why wouldn't I be a person to bring it forward? I have tenure that allows me the intellectual freedom to pursue, um, new ideas and new branches of knowledge. I was a social worker in a trauma center. I've worked with people in acute mental health crisis. I have, the clinical background. I guess I could. And so like I just had this moment, and within like seconds that people are watching me have this realization at the table. You know, uh Tura Patterson from Usona Institute was like, well, I'm going to connect you with Ben Nesmer at the Cohen Foundation, like for you to have a conversation. And that just, it happened so fast. I wasn't going to say no. I was like, oh, okay, well, I'll have this conversation with Ben. And so I got on the phone with Ben. He was, I really didn't have like an idea other than, maybe we could start doing some curriculum at Columbia School of Social Work. And he said, you should talk to Sandy Sandberg. She has been working with Penn School of Nursing. She's hoping to get nursing curriculum started at Penn. And they did this really amazing 10-part learning series on psychedelics for nurses. And he sent me a link, and he's like, do you mind if I connect you with Sandy? And I was like, yeah, sure, that'd be great. So, Sandy and I started meeting, and she told me about the learning series, and I was like, great, we should do one of those for social work. And then we thought, like maybe we could collaborate, and Penn School of Nursing could collaborate with Columbia School of Social Work, and we could, get curriculum in both schools, like as like kind of a sister, institution. And then at that point it evolved to, well, if we're, if you're doing it at Penn Nursing, maybe I can get Columbia Nursing involved. Maybe we can get Penn School Social Work involved. Maybe we could have the four schools across the two universities and get something in, all four. And and it was based on this premise of like nursing and social work being very complementary, professions. And they're both professions that are diverse. They are boots on the ground, pragmatic. Nurses and social workers are in almost every institution that people encounter throughout their life course. um, and they're highly skilled, highly qualified care providers. And mental health, social workers are the dominant mental health provider. When people say, I'm going to see a therapist, like 7 out of 10 times they're saying, I'm going to see a social worker. They just don't think that way. Um, so that's where we kind of started. I didn't actually know that Sandy was a funder when we were having all these conversations. I thought she was like this just incredible thought partner. And we were just bouncing ideas, and we had this idea like, oh, we can bring in 5 faculty from all four schools. We can have them trained by, at the time it was MAPS and USONA. Then we can, give them the curriculum, and these 5 faculty can kind of form a core within the school of like tenured people and tenure line people, and lecturers, and just kind of a force, right? Because you have to move these things through an administrative process. So you want some gravity around the people who are trying to make it happen, especially if there might be any resistance or concern. You want a group of people who are all equally informed. So that, was kind of our idea. And when I said, okay, well, I've got the proposal, I'm going to send it to the Cohen Foundation. She's like, great, I'm gonna fund half of it. And I was like, oh, like, oh, that's amazing. I had no idea
Wow.
that that was like on that was you were the yeah. I was just like so surprised by that and honored and it was just an incredible experience to work with her on developing that and that's kind of where it started. And that was, I guess, I want to say 2 or 3 years ago, maybe, that we the Cohen Foundation approved the grant, and I hired Brooke Stott, who was an amazing social worker who had experience in building programs and also a lot of experience in psychedelic therapy. And we, worked with USONA and MAPS to start this faculty training program.
That is the origin story of U-PEP, but yeah, before U-PEP, it was UPenn and Columbia.
Though funny enough, we had a hard time getting, so we had these 20 spots for the faculty, but we had a really hard time getting 5 faculty from each school to commit to 2 weeks of training.
Mm.
I think we overestimated the enthusiasm that people would have. And so I had all of these spots that were still available for faculty. So I said, well, I'm going to just start reaching out to people and see from other universities. And so I reached out to my friend Leo Cabasa from Washington University in St. Louis. I reached out to my friend Colleen Grogan from University of Chicago. Reached out, I cold emailed the people at Howard University who, I mean, it's just at first they were like, who are you? What are you offering? You're offering a free training for faculty in psychedelic assisted therapy. Like, but to their credit, they are like, let's, get on a call, let's talk, let's see what's going on. And then they ended up participating. So even the pilot, the first training of faculty ended up having faculty from probably 5 or 6 different universities there, all with uh, all with social work and nursing backgrounds. Um, and that, I mean, I think that then made it very clear that you could, you know, reach a broader audience that, if you just, you know, email people and say, hey, we're doing this, that you can get some enthusiasm. I didn't anticipate that there would be as much enthusiasm as it turned out that there is and has been. So that was, a very pleasant surprise. But the first or the first training that was Columbia and Penn was actually broader than Columbia and Penn. And, we were very happy that, we met the objectives of the grant. By the time the grant ended, it was a 2-year project. All 4 schools had curriculum and psychedelic assisted therapy. And here at Columbia, we had developed a comprehensive training program. And now, of course, there's electives popping up all over the country.
Amazing. Yeah, I'll actually just let folks know that are watching and listening in the cohort that's going through the process right now. In 2025, there's actually 63 faculty members that are coming from 30 universities in America from 22 different states, part of this current cohort. And it's still social workers and nurses, but in the next round, the 2026, and applications are open now, it's also going to be students that are learning all about public health, psychology, and just medicine. Yeah, just MDs doing
Yeah,
their medicine training.
yeah.
So it's expanding to 5. It's going to be expanding to more states, more universities. And, it's phenomenal to hear that they came at the right time in the right way and then revealed that they had, a foundation to help to provide that grant. So it's happening for a reason. This isn't an accident. What do you feel is the reason why it's happening now with psychedelics in particular, Heidi? What is it around psychedelic assisted therapy, research, and also how it affects policy that has such an important role to play with the society culture that we're living in right now?
I think I think the world is desperate for treatments that work.
Mm.
That's I mean, that's probably the most significant reason is that there is so much suffering, and our treatments for that suffering are kind of woefully inadequate. I think also the delivery of care that we have evolved into is one that is not very compassionate, and one that, in fact, if you're, if you encounter it, it can actually feel really cold. Um, I I will say this, I believe this. It may not be a popular idea, but I think that the medical model is failing patients. I think this idea of having people come to you, categorizing them by lists of symptoms, um, medicating them and sending them on their way is, it's, it's not enough. And, these psychotropic drugs that we have a lot of side effects. They take a really long time to work. And often people spend months, sometimes years, trying to find the right dose, the right medication, the right combination of medications. And during that whole time, like, they're suffering, and it's impacting their ability to work, it's impacting their relationships, it's taking a toll. And so, I think one of the things that make people so excited about psychedelics is that if they're going to work, and they don't always work, they're not for everybody, but if they're going to work, they work very quickly. And they also, it's like good medicine instead of bad medicine. I know we like our medicine bitter. We like, if it feels awful when it's happening, it must be really doing its job. But people have beautiful, beautiful experiences in psychedelic sessions that I think, it's appealing, this idea of healing being something that can be nurturing, that can be warm and connected. And I think that for like a profession like social work that became really in you know really involved in the medical model, absorbed by the medical model, where we, work in it almost as much as if it were our own. It's a nice return to that broader biopsychosocial person and environment way of seeing people. And it allows us to do what we've always really wanted to do, which is to connect with people in a meaningful way. Um, and um, I think that when people see and hear the results of the clinical trials, and they hear people talking about their experiences, and they look at their practices, and they see the people who've been stuck for years, they see the suffering that they really haven't been able to alleviate, they want this option. They want to be able to expand their scope of practice, to be able to offer this to people for whom it would be appropriate. And so, certainly there is hype about psychedelics. And I do think that makes the professions kind of wary.
Hmm.
Anything that gets overhyped, they're like, I mean, the opioids were hyped for a period of time. We're inherently wary of things that, like, are promising a cure. But, nobody's promising a cure with psychedelics. I mean, if they are, they shouldn't be. But it is another tool in a very limited toolbox, and one that aligns with the profession's values and can offer, we hope, a lot of people relief from their suffering. And so that's I think the draw.
Mm.
Um, and and the people who are involved are very passionate. They care a lot, and that's been used as a criticism against the researchers who do this work. It's been used as a criticism against people who are promoting it. Oh, they're evangelists. And, you know, I can get that people are concerned about evangelism in science. I mean, we should be concerned about that. We should, we need to do good science. And I think a lot of people are doing good science. And it's okay to be excited about a new therapy.
Mm. Permission to be excited granted. Yeah.
Permissions, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's
Yeah.
coming in conjunction with the science. And there's some amazing data out there. And if you're trying to convince someone, or at the very least open their mind to psychedelics being a valid part of medicine, being an option on the menu for patients for a number of conditions, then yeah, the data and the research is phenomenal. So let's get a little bit technical, Heidi. When you were building the program, the student journey, what bits of the standard MSW program did you snip out, and what did you replace them with? So, what was in a sense the same, what was new, and then where did you get all that new content from so that it was rigorous and respectable and reputable enough so that it would get approval by your dean and all the powers that be, and it would be taken very seriously, especially because you were the first
Yes.
person doing this and there wasn't a U-PEP
Right.
behind you at the time. So how did you kind of
Yeah.
convince people and find the right research, data, best practices around how to build the curriculum and the teaching team?
So I started by receiving training myself, and there are a lot of really fabulous uh, postgraduate education and training programs in psychedelics. I went to the CIS program, and I also received training through that from MAPS. I've received training from USONA. Here at Columbia, I've had the opportunity to work on the Compass Pathways training for therapists, and not work on it, but to receive, to be a participant in that. And so I really got exposed to, I think, what are excellent examples of programs who are trying, to provide this comprehensive education in the psychedelic science and where the science is. Um, and there's so many advantages of a post-grad training program. One is that, the people in the program are already licensed clinicians, so they have practice experience that they bring to that environment. Two, it's really interdisciplinary, so people from a lot of different backgrounds are coming together. And I think that, the weaknesses are exactly related to that, meaning that, some people have been practiced for a long time, meaning they've been out of school for a long time. So you don't know that they received, the most up-to-date training that would be provided if you were going to medical school now, or you were going to social work school now, or nursing school now. Um, you also don't know what they received in their professional training, because you have people across so many different disciplines. And so those programs really have to hit a broad level. And I don't want to call it a basic level, because I think that, they do go into a good amount of nuance and depth, but they have to kind of start with we don't know where people are starting from. We have to back up and then move forward. And that can cause, some difficulties. So one of the training programs I went to was MAPS. And um, we had this really uncomfortable process by which some of the older white therapists were like, why are we talking so much about racism? And it really derailed like days of the training program while, this was hashed out. And when I was participating in that, I thought, I can't imagine that happening in a school of social work. And it's simply because by the time I see students, they're second year students, they have already had a comprehensive education in structural oppression. And so, they're ready to focus on other things. And so while I think that it's a strength, there's so many strengths of the post-grad training programs, there's some real strengths of having a program embedded within a professional education. And one of them is that I know what classes everybody's taking. I know what their syllabi look like. I know exactly what they're learning. And so I don't have to repeat it in my psychedelic therapy training program. I can start from where the other faculty have left off, and I can really focus on psychedelics. And and how it applies to social work. I don't have to try to think about how psychedelics are going to apply to anesthesia, or how it's going to apply to somebody working in a pain clinic, or how it might apply in oncology. I can think about, the social worker in all of those contexts and what their role is and what their scope of practice is. And so I think that allows us to be really tight,
Hmm.
and that allows us to go really deep. And so I took what I learned from the training programs and, my own research and reading. And, like I said, I was working with the wonderful Brooke Stott, and we just sat down with our blank Word document and started sketching out, what we thought a comprehensive training program would look like for social workers. And you do the very best you can. We both wanted it to be an excellent training program. And with the generosity of the people at CIS and MAPS and SONA and every time we reached out to ask for support or resources, people were just extremely generous. And, we just put it together. And, it's funny because it's, um, it's a labor of love. It was such a huge time commitment, and we cared so much about the process. And it wasn't until, like after we ran through the first cohort last year that we realized, like, oh, we forgot a class on this. And you start to realize, like, oh, there's like parts that are missing and things that need to be rearranged. And, so it certainly isn't and wasn't perfect. But we tried to draw from all of the places where knowledge has been generated in this area, and that includes how these medicines have been used in indigenous contexts, ceremonially, religiously. It includes, the early psychedelic research, the more contemporary psychedelic research. There's so much happening that, in some ways the field is very new. In some ways you could say that the evidence is still, weak
Hmm.
and not, conclusive. But there's so much out there and so much that's being generated that it's actually just a challenge to stay on top of it. And so
Yeah.
what we tell the students, and what I tell people when we went through curriculum committee and clinical faculty committee is, we hold science lightly. And this is what we do in all fields. You hold the evidence, you triangulate evidence from different sources, you look for evidence that contradicts your evidence, you allow the research to shift, you allow the questions to evolve, you allow things that you thought were true yesterday to no longer be true tomorrow. And that's, that is what we do in education institutes like Columbia and other universities. Like this is actually what we're good at. So the fact that, we don't know everything hasn't been really a problem.
Yeah. Amazing. So I'd love to continue, but there's so much more to talk about. U-PEP in particular, how they're now helping the next generation of universities do what you did on your Word doc, but they've now got all these resources and experts and yeah, kind of toolboxes and roadmaps to help other faculties go through it. But before we talk about U-PEP particularly, I want to hear the student voice. So your students at Columbia, like, first of all, who are they? Like, what kinds of students are wanting this kind of MSW? Why? What do they want to do with it in practice? And do you have any stories or testimonials of their experience of being part of this program?
Well, so last year's cohort, when they came to Columbia, did not know that this program was going to be on offer. We, you know, we built it and we offered it to second year students. When they came here as first year students, it didn't exist. So we just sent out a general email to all students who were going to go into their second year saying, hey, do you want to be part of this psychedelic therapy training program? And, they were students who had heard about psychedelic assisted therapy, and a couple of them already knew that this is what they wanted to do, but a very significant number of them they came to a info session where we showed some of the research, we talked about the program, and they, just got excited and committed. That's very different than the cohort that started this year because these folks heard about the program and they applied to Columbia School of Social Work because they wanted to do this program. So I've noticed
Ah,
like a very distinct difference between, the students that we have this year and the students we had last year. We did a lot of probing of the students of like, "Well, how do you like this? And how do you like that?" And we had focus groups and we had a long, course evaluation on top of the regular course evaluations that they do. And, the students, I feel like, loved their experience. There's some challenges with the practicum, which we can talk about more if you want to. But they had a great time, and I think the culminating like story for me was I was at psychedelic science, and everywhere I turned, I could see little groups of my students moving around. They were going into, a bunch of them came. And so they went to psychedelic
And
science
that's
and
the
they were,
conference in Denver with thousands of
yeah,
people all
the
about
conference.
psychedelics.
Yes.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah. So they got an Airbnb and they were all staying together. And then and I'd just be walking around and I would see them talking to these pioneers in the field. I saw them asking questions during panel presentations. And then I suggested that we have lunch on one of the final days. And one of the things that they said that really made me feel good is someone said, I keep going into these sessions and I feel like somebody will ask a question of a panelist and I feel like I know the answer. Like I could answer that question. Like they felt like that,
Mm.
the things that they were hearing were things that they, were expecting to hear, that they had gotten a broad enough and a deep enough education that they were sitting there in the audience with some expertise. And that's all you can ask of somebody who's just graduating from their MSW program. Like what I try to tell people is I think the training program is sufficient for people to practice without needing to take additional training programs.
Okay.
Obviously, they need to take CEUs and things like that as part of their ongoing education, but I don't think that they need to go and enroll in a program like CIS or Naropa or Fluence. But that they'll need supervision because all new social workers have, as you know, years of supervision before they practice on their own license. And so to see that they looked in this mirror of where the profession is, and they were like, I know this stuff. That gives them the confidence. Of course, they still have to, get their clinical chops that only can be gained through years and years of experience, but that they felt like they had a good foundation. And I think I should mention, because
Hmm.
when you said we're talking about U-PEP and one of the advantages of U-PEP, one of the things that we did as part of the original grant and as part of U-PEP is that every syllabi that we've developed, which is 6 different syllabi here at Columbia, um, 4 for the intensive training program and a short elective and then a semester long elective, everything that we've had approved by our curriculum committee and our clinical faculty, all of the slides that we develop
Mm.
for every class, all of my lecture notes that I put in the slides of things I want to remember, all of the little resources that we've developed, like little video vignettes and things like that, all of that we've made available on the U-PEP website. So as faculty are getting trained at U-PEP in basic psychedelic education, and they think about like, I want to, I'm not ready to develop a elective, but I want to start to integrate psychedelic therapy into the class I teach on substance use disorder. They can go into the files on the SABA website and they can find the class that we have on substance use disorder, and they can pull down those slides and those lecture notes and they can start from there. Or if they say, I want to do an elective, they can pull down our elective and they can say, oh, I think I would have a class on mechanisms here and I would have more content on indigenous use,
Yeah.
like they can evolve it and make it their own. And so they don't actually have to do what Brooke and I did, which is like, uh,
From scratch. Yeah.
whoa, yeah, like, whoa, okay, week 1, what are we going to do? Introductions. Yay, we have something written down. They don't have to do that, which is, I think, the gift the real gift that we're giving
Yeah.
in
This is a
the youth.
huge point, Heidi. Just to kind of double down on this. There, usually in education, you're not allowed to copy and plagiarism's not allowed. But
Right.
with U-PEP, it's actually the opposite. Every partner, every faculty that's developing their curriculums, modules, electives, talks, lesson plans, it's all shared. It is a collective, it is a community, and we're helping each other. Why? because that's just I think particularly the social work and nursing way of doing things, and we're hoping it inspires other practices to be a bit more let's all play in the sandpit together. But this is about accessibility. It's about fast tracking, the education, so that, yeah, like you're saying, there's going to be a bottleneck around insurance coverage, around competence, and through U-PEP doing this, it's making sure that we're ready to go when the FDA approves MDMA, psilocybin, or if there's some other kind of fast track programs, end up happening, then we've got really competent, comprehensively trained practitioners. And there's also a nice piece that in what you're saying, Heidi, that like not everyone's got to do the same thing. Like not everyone's got to do certificate program. You might want to start small. You can build it yourself, match your own needs, and there can be some interdepartmental collaboration within your own, faculties in university. There can be some beautiful, collaborations as well happening between, nursing, social work, psychology, for example. So that's really awesome, isn't it? That this is all being shared as a collective, not kind of squirreled away and kept privately to get intellectual property over your resources.
Yeah, it's a real paradigm shift. And I think that, you said it very well that my purpose in starting the program within the School of Social Work was to lower the barrier to entry in the field. New
Mm,
social workers do not make a lot of money and they're coming out of school with student loans. And the idea that they would have to sign up for a $10,000, $15,000 training program in order to practice, like that is what makes it prohibitively expensive for them to participate in insurance plans.
right.
That is what makes it impossible for them to take Medicaid, is that they have to have this very expensive education. So I can't make Columbia education any, less expensive than it is, but I can say that if you participate in this program, it will be at no additional cost to you in your education, which is what I, am committed to doing. Is it lowers the barrier to entry in the field. They can get the education while they're in school, they can go in the field. And it's the same philosophy with U-PEP. You're asking faculty to put time into developing curriculum for tenure track faculty who cannot get funded for NIH scientific research related to psychedelics. It's very risky to commit a lot of time to developing curriculum. That's time that you should be writing papers, doing research that will get you tenure. At the end of your tenure clock, they're going to make a decision about whether you can stay or whether you have to go. And so, you know, all senior mentors are going to say, no, are you doing psychedelic research that's funded? No, then don't start some passion curriculum project. And then you have the problem that people that have tenure, they've been tenured in some other field. So what do they know about psychedelics? So it didn't exist, in practice 10 years ago when they were coming up and gaining their expertise. So you're asking them to take on something new to develop this curriculum project. And so what we're doing by making the resources freely available for people to take up is lowering the barrier of entry for them to go into the field, allowing them to do what needs to be done without taking maximum bandwidth away from their ability to do their expertise that they've developed or to develop their expertise. And so it's really strategic. um, I think it's incredibly necessary. I don't think, if we wait for NIH funding, if we, uh, do this piecemeal, that, as you said, I don't think that we'll have the providers that we need to do the work. Um,
I think a really key piece around what we're trying to do here is make it as easy as possible for as many people to be trained and ready to go whenever the green light gets pushed. And I think, some of that is by giving toolkits, by giving a guidebook on, what to expect. And over the 1 year journey working with U-PEP, there's actually a 5 day in person at USONA where you were as well in Wisconsin, where faculty go meet each other. There's some experiential kind of work as well there. You get matched with a mentor. There's curriculum consultations with experts, and then there's every year there's the Learning Collaborative at 1440 Multiversity, which looks like an amazing place to go. You mentioned the SABA Resource Hub, where all of the kind of curriculums and elective and classes and lessons plan lives in, yeah, monthly talks with experts. So we're just trying to make it as easy as possible to do this, because it is a little bit confronting. It is a bit scary, and somehow, you took that brave step. So, as a question, with all the resources that's available to make it easier, if someone's still not sure if they're ready, if their faculty is the right faculty or their university and their dean's the right people, what could you say to them that gives them that confidence to apply to U-PEP and to begin thinking, I can do this, or we're ready. Let's start exploring where we can move this.
I don't think that, we're preparing just for FDA approval. I think that the case to be made is that if people are going to places like Colorado and Oregon to get psychedelic adult supervised use, they're going underground because they are hearing about psychedelics and they don't want to wait. They are going to other countries and
Yeah.
experiencing psychedelics. So, you know, therapists who see anybody need to be prepared for somebody coming in saying, I'm going to go and take a psychedelic for my mental health, or I just came back from taking a psychedelic for my mental health. And so we're preparing the profession for now, not for a year from now or 2 years from now when the FDA approves psychedelics. We're preparing the profession for now.
This is really important you've mentioning this. I'm so happy we've got this in the conversation, because realistically, yes, people have been using psychedelic plant medicines for thousands of years, prehistorical. We don't really know how far back it goes. People have been using it now, even though some of them are not yet legal. Behavior hasn't changed.
Well,
And as a social
yeah,
worker,
or there is legal, or they're going to
mm,
Oregon. Oregon has done more psilocybin sessions than all of the research combined.
yeah,
And like
yeah.
they're doing thousands of psilocybin sessions in Oregon. I did a psilocybin session in Oregon as part of my training. So, like people are accessing this, and state ballot initiatives, things that are happening, like New Mexico just passed a law. They're trying to get natural medicine. So it says something when the public is trying in some ways to kind of bypass the slow process at the FDA, and they have, like there are licensed professionals in Colorado who can use psychedelics as part of their clinical scope of practice. And so that day is here, that day is now, and we just have to get the workforce caught up. So everything that we're doing right now, I think, is very, very critical so that patients aren't outpacing us. We're not caught off guard. And I think that right now we probably are caught off guard. I think there are people who have a psychedelic experience. Sometimes it's really beneficial, and they want to come and they want to integrate what their benefits into their life, and their therapist is like, wait a minute, whoa, slow down. No, change doesn't happen that fast. Like,
Hmm.
I don't think this is real. And they, maybe challenging the person's healing experience, or somebody could go and have a destabilizing experience and they come back to their therapist and they're like, this is, since I came back from my retreat, this is happening. And the therapist is just, inadequately prepared to know how to support that person. And so, I think we're trying to catch up. I really do. I think
Hmm.
that there's more happening than we're meeting the need right now. And that anything that we can do to scale up quickly of high quality education and get it to as many professionals as possible, that is just, so important.
Amazing. Thank you, Heidi. I love that you shared that. And that is a very convincing argument that other faculty members might want to use when they're talking to their deans, or all the powers that be around getting approval for this. It's the time is now. Like, it's not waiting. There's so many people right now that need this help, and it's not just obviously social workers and nurses. All medical healthcare practitioners need baseline training, familiarity, competence level of
Yeah,
uh,
they need a basic education.
yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so that's why we're
Yeah.
talking psychologists and public health folks as well, and obviously medical doctors. This needs to be part of their training, because they don't get it when when they're boarded and they go through their their faculty training. Um,
And
any
we do see, I would say we do see evidence in the, like the national surveillance data we have on people's self-reported drug use. Like people are increasingly reporting use of the categorizations are a little, problematic, but they are reporting increased use of things like psilocybin and MDMA. And so we know more people are using these substances, and I think people are, using them, trying to use them as medicine. Certainly there's recreational use, but I think that people are hearing the science as it's being reported through the media, and they are saying, I'm desperate. I'm going to try to find somebody that, a place where I can go to have psilocybin. And people with resources, as I said, people with resources are finding the way to do it. And it's still just the populations that don't have those resources to fly to Oregon or fly to Colorado or participate in an underground ceremony or go to a retreat center in Jamaica. Those are the folks that are, as I worried, are being left behind.
Yeah. All right. We are almost at time, but I wanted to ask maybe one more question, Heidi. And it's around, yeah, your area of specialty, accessibility and equity. And if we're talking to funders, philanthropists that are interested in psychedelic assisted therapy and helping it to scale and be accessible, why would you say that the U-PEP model in particular and this organization is going to be particularly helpful for making sure that the workforce is ready now, and particularly that individual students who need to be represented are going to be able to enter that workforce now?
I think that UPEP is just such amazing bang for the buck.
Mm.
Um, as you mentioned, like this is an entirely different paradigm for how you are trained to be an academic. Like the minute you enter into a tenure track position, they're like, okay, how are you going to make a name for yourself? How are you going to put your stamp on your research? How are you going to become the expert that people think of when that a topic is raised? And like that is what you're trained to do, and you're trained to own things and claim things, and anybody who wants to engage with an area has to cite you, and it's really,
Mhm.
it's a slow broken system, and UPEP has just simply bypassed it. And I remember, when we were talking about like, oh, everything is just going to be available to I had this moment where I was like, wow, that's really different. It feels like I could feel it coming up against everything that I had known. And then I had this moment where I was like, yes, yes. Like I don't have to be the name on this. It doesn't have to be me. It's us. It's all of us. We can all share it. We can all, contribute to it. We can all own it. And what the UPOP model does is it asks people to get their dean on board before they even apply. They're signing, this form that says that they're, participating in this collaborative relationship before they even start the program. So it's like the cards are laid out, and people come into it knowing that, and they're starting things at their school. They're, making this big contribution at their school, but they're doing so in a way that they're not alone, that they're engaging with professionals all over the country, where they have this like learning community. And when you look at the number of faculty across the different schools, and you think about issues like disparities, like racial and ethnic disparities or urban rural disparities, you think about, the disadvantage that universities might have in a rural area, or if they focus on a student body that comes from disadvantaged backgrounds, and you're leveling the playing field, and you're making it easy for faculty in under-resourced universities in under-resourced areas to do the same thing that's happening at Columbia University, or the same thing that's happening at Penn, and they can bring that curriculum to their students. Their students can get that high quality training. They have mentorship, they have support, they have access to teaching tools that have been developed, and they can graduate highly trained, highly skilled professionals who can go into the field. And that is so efficient. That is such a good use of money from my perspective. I mean, I feel like, um, you see how much money gets invested in trying to create a startup, you know, oh, like you see this a lot in the psychedelic space. A lot of money gets thrown into an idea, 20 people are hired, they rent a building, they do this stuff, and then it disappears. You know, Columbia University is not going to disappear. Penn is not going to disappear. Howard University is not going to disappear. University of Alaska is not going to disappear. Like these are institutions that are embedded into the states that they live, into the communities that they work with, and they are going to continue to produce these professionals every single year that goes into the field. And so to get them at a spot and give them their education without it costing them more money, and then allowing them to go into the field without an additional, like for people who participate in my program, without having to take out additional student loans or, you know, go without eating because they're trying to
Mhm.
build their expertise. Like this is a way to really make the case that every social worker, and this is the case that I say to my students, like every social worker should accept Medicaid. Every social worker who's a therapist should participate in insurance. Like that is a social justice practice. And I can ask that of you because I'm not charging you anything to get this education. And I hope that that's a model that will spread.
Yeah, wow, there's so many reasons there that all make loads of sense about why the benefits are not just this narrow one thing for one group of people. So many reasons. Just the idea that, well, if you're going to get your MSW anyway, that's a lot of debt. Let's include this really important training that is going to be incredibly essential right now. So I love it. And I just want to add, Heidi, that for people that are listening or watching on YouTube, if you want to apply for the next cohort starting September 2026, the applications are open until December the 5th this year. And they're open, as we've said, to nursing, social work, psychology, medicine, and public health. And you go to upep.org for more information. We'd love to hear from you. And perhaps just as a closing question, Heidi, what is your hope? If all this great progress that you've been part of, inspiring so many people to do this before U-PEP, if this momentum continues, what do you think is possible in, say, 5 or 10 years when we're looking around psychedelic assisted therapy, psychedelic competence within the healthcare, health science, and innovation system? What might we see around patients and people, humans, accessing psychedelics for a myriad of ways to be healthier, live longer, and for communities as well to be healthier as well?
Well, I think, in health policy, we always say the goal is the right care at the right time at the right place. And that's what I would like to see in psychedelics. So, I would like to see if psychedelics can, rapidly improve depression. I'd like to see it in inpatient psychiatric clinics.
Mhm.
If psychedelics can help people with existential end of life distress, I want to see it in oncology clinics. I want to see it in hospice. If psychedelics can, help people with postpartum depression, I want to see women's health clinics having a specialty. You want to see it integrated wherever it can be useful. And you want people to get safe, high quality care. You want it to be a positive experience. You want their experience to have lasting impacts. And I totally believe that that is possible. And I do think that all of these different professions, public health, social work, nursing, the person who goes to their primary care provider and starts crying during the visit, like all of those professionals need to know, who could benefit from psychedelics, what they could benefit for, what the risks are. And when we get there, if the patient can actually find someone who will provide that care in a way that they can afford, like to me, then like we've arrived. That's how I'll know that our work is done and I can retire in peace.
Amen. Yeah. So it's no longer this niche, boutique, weird little piece on the end of the spectrum. It's actually the spectrum contains psychedelic competence in education and capacity building and resources to different degrees and different disciplines. It's sprinkled
As
all through.
appropriate. Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
Yeah.
Heidi, Thank you. This was amazing. Thank you for everything you've done from the very beginning. And for folks that are interested to, connect with you, find out more information about you and the MSW at Columbia, could you direct them to where they can get more information?
Yeah, so I don't know that I ever explicitly said this, but we have a four class, four courses offered during the advanced clinical practice year for students who are already admitted to our program, and they do a 600-hour practicum and a psychedelic related placement. And so, in order to come to Columbia and participate in the program, you have to be accepted into our MSW program. And then in your first year, you can attend a info session, and then it's a competitive application process. So they can just go to the website and apply to come to New York City and study at Columbia.
Amazing. All right, Dr. Heidi Allen, thank you so much for being our first ever guest on U-PEP.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, this was great.
It's been fun.
Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening to our first ever U-PEP show. Take care.